Have you ever stopped to notice how certain colors just grab you for no apparent reason? Like when you're walking past a store, looking at a landscape, or just zoning out somewhere, and suddenly a specific color seizes your entire attention as if it's speaking directly to something inside you that you didn't even know existed. And maybe you've noticed that this preference for certain colors changes as you go through different phases of life, as if your subconscious is trying to tell you something your conscious mind can't quite grasp yet. There's a silent restlessness that many people carry, a feeling of not knowing themselves completely, of making decisions without truly understanding what motivates them, of reacting to situations in ways that later make no sense, of repeating patterns they swore they'd never repeat. It's like living partially in the dark about yourself, knowing there's a whole dimension of your personality that remains hidden, influencing every choice, every relationship, every moment of joy or suffering. Have you ever wondered why certain people instantly attract or repel you? Why specific situations make you anxious for no apparent reason? Why you react with anger when you expected to react calmly, or why you withdraw when you'd like to open up? The truth is, your conscious mind, the one you believe is in control, represents only a tiny fraction of who you really are. Beneath it, constantly operating behind the scenes of your existence, is the unconscious, that vast psychic territory Sigmund Freud dedicated his life to exploring and understanding. And today, through an apparently simple choice, you're going to gain access to a doorway into this hidden world within you. There's something fascinating about the choices we make without thinking, those that happen before our rational mind has time to interfere. It's in these moments that the unconscious reveals itself most clearly, like a flash of truth, cutting through all the layers of defense we've built throughout life. Right now, you're standing before a unique opportunity to look within yourself through a mirror that reflects not your appearance, but the deep structure of your psyche. Before you are 4 colors, each vibrating at a different psychic frequency, each connected to fundamental aspects of the human mind's functioning according to Freudian psychoanalysis. The first is an intense, vibrant red, pulsing with energy and vitality. The second is a deep, serene blue, like the ocean on a windless day. The third is a radiant, luminous yellow, shining with an almost solar clarity. And the fourth is a dense, earthy green, full of textures and nuances. Don't analyze. Don't try to figure out what each color means before you choose. Let your eyes rest on these 4 options and observe, with honesty and curiosity, which one exerts a magnetic pull on you. Which color seems to be calling you, tugging at you, speaking to a part of you that doesn't use words? Take a deep breath. Relax any tension in your body and just feel. Your first impression, your visceral response, is the most true. The id, that primitive, instinctive force Freud identified as the deepest core of personality, doesn't think, doesn't judge, doesn't hesitate. It simply wants, it simply feels, it simply is. And it's precisely this primal voice you need to hear now. If you chose the intense, vibrant red, you are connected to one of the most powerful and fundamental psychic forces of human existence, what Freud called the life drive, or eros. This energy is linked to your capacity to desire, to seek pleasure, to assert your presence in the world with strength and determination. Red is not a timid or hesitant color. It doesn't hide, it doesn't apologize, it doesn't ask permission to exist. And this reveals something profound about the structure of your personality. There is an intensity in you that you often try to control or disguise because we live in a society that fears genuine passion, authentic expression of desires, the raw manifestation of human vitality. Your id, that primitive, instinctive part of the psyche, is particularly strong and active. You feel things with a depth that sometimes scares even you. When you want something, you really want it. When you love with a totality that can be overwhelming. When you get angry, the rage comes with an intensity that seems disproportionate to the event that provoked it. This happens because your emotions aren't filtered or diluted. They emerge directly from the most authentic core of your being. Freud would say that in you, the pleasure principle still operates with great force, resisting the attempts of the reality principle to completely tame it. But this isn't necessarily a problem, even if it's been treated as one for much of your life. In fact, this strong connection to your life drives is a source of creativity, of passion, of the ability to engage deeply with life. People who choose red often have biographies marked by intense experiences, passionate relationships, courageous decisions, moments of great joy, and also of great suffering. You don't live halfway. You can't fake feelings you don't have, nor hide the ones you do. There's a brutal honesty in your way of being in the world, even when you try to be more diplomatic or reserved. However, this intensity comes with specific challenges. The superego, that psychic instance that internalizes social rules and moral values, is likely in constant conflict with your powerful ID. You often feel guilt. You question whether you should have acted differently. You wonder why you can't be calmer, more controlled, more like the people around you who seem to navigate life with less emotional turbulence. This internal conflict can manifest in various ways. Perhaps you oscillate between moments of total expression, where you act impulsively following your desires, and moments of severe repression, where you try to completely suppress your impulses to compensate for previous excesses. This dynamic creates a pattern of emotional back and forth that can be exhausting for both you and those close to you. Freud observed that when the superego is excessively rigid and punitive, it doesn't eliminate the ID's drives. It merely forces them into the unconscious, where they continue to operate in disguised and often more problematic ways. Have you ever caught yourself doing exactly what you swore you'd never do? Have you ever been surprised by a disproportionate reaction to something small, only to realize later that it touched something much deeper? These are signs that the conflict between your ID and superego is playing out behind the scenes of your consciousness. Your choice of red also points to a complex relationship with aggression. Freud understood aggression not just as destructive violence, but as a vital energy necessary for asserting boundaries, protecting what's important, and fighting for what you desire. People with a strong connection to red often struggle to find a healthy balance with this energy. Either they repress it entirely, becoming passive and unable to defend themselves, or they express it explosively and destructively, hurting themselves and others. The middle path, where assertiveness is clear but not violent, where boundaries are firm but not rigid, is something you're likely still learning to navigate, and that's perfectly okay. Self-awareness isn't about achieving impossible perfection, but about understanding more and more deeply how you function so you can make more conscious choices about how you want to live. If you chose deep, serene blue, you're revealing a quite different psychic structure, one where the ego, that mediating instance between the ID's demands and the superego's requirements, has developed considerable strength and sophistication. Blue is the color of depth, of reflection, of diving into the calm waters of introspection. Freud would say that in you, the reality principle has conquered significant ground, allowing you to postpone immediate gratification in favor of more complex and lasting goals. This doesn't mean you're devoid of passion or desire, but rather that you've developed an elaborate capacity to process your impulses before acting on them. While the person who chose red feels and acts almost simultaneously, you feel and then think, analyze, ponder, consider consequences. There is a psychic elegance to this way of functioning, an ability to navigate the complexities of social life more easily than those whose drives are more immediate and transparent. You're likely seen by those around you as balanced, reliable, capable of maintaining calm in situations that destabilize others, and that's true to a degree. The problem is that this competence in managing your emotions and impulses can morph into something more problematic, what Freud called intellectualization, a defense mechanism where thinking is used excessively to avoid direct contact with difficult feelings. Have you ever noticed how sometimes you can talk about your emotions with impressive clarity and articulation, but without actually feeling them as you speak? How you can describe a painful situation with almost academic detachment, as if you were talking about someone else? This happens because your ego has learned to create a buffer zone between emotional impulse and conscious expression. And while this ability is valuable in many contexts, it can also disconnect you from the richness and vitality of direct emotional experience. People who choose blue often have childhood histories where they learned early on that expressing intense emotions was dangerous, inappropriate, or ineffective. Perhaps you grew up in an environment where rationality was valued above all else, where showing vulnerability was interpreted as weakness, where you had to be the responsible adult even as a child. And you learned that lesson well. You've developed a strong, competent ego capable of functioning exemplarily in the external world. But what happened to all those emotional needs that couldn't be expressed? The anger that couldn't be shown, the fear that had to be hidden, the sadness that no one wanted to see. Freud taught us that nothing truly disappears from the psyche. What cannot be conscious becomes unconscious. What cannot be expressed directly finds indirect ways to manifest. And in you, this can appear as a certain background melancholy, a subtle but persistent sense that something is missing, even when objectively everything is fine in your life. It might manifest as difficulty truly relaxing, as constant vigilance over yourself and your surroundings, as an inability to fully surrender to pleasurable experiences because there's always a part of you observing, analyzing, maintaining control. The choice of blue also suggests a particular relationship with what Freud called the death drive, or thanatos. Before you get scared by the term, it's important to understand that Freud wasn't literally talking about a desire to die, but about a psychic tendency toward quietude, rest, and tension reduction. While Eros pushes you toward life, movement, and passionate engagement with the world, Thanatos pulls you toward silence, peace, and a state of lower excitation. In you, Thanatos isn't necessarily destructive, but it manifests as a longing for tranquility, for moments of contemplative solitude, for spaces where you don't always have to be performing or managing impressions. You value depth over surface, prefer a few genuine friendships to many superficial acquaintances, and seek quality and authenticity in your connections. But pay attention if this movement toward withdrawal isn't becoming a form of avoidance. If you're not using your need for peace and quiet as an excuse not to take risks, not to expose yourself, not to allow others to truly know you in all your vulnerability and imperfection. The challenge for those who choose blue is to find the balance between thinking and feeling, between control and surrender, between the admirable competence of your ego and the pulsating vitality of your id that's still down there, waiting to be recognized and integrated. If you chose radiant, luminous yellow, you're revealing a psychic configuration where the pursuit of recognition, visibility, and external validation occupies a central place. Yellow is the color that most demands attention, that cannot be ignored, that shines and draws eyes wherever it is. And this says something fundamental about how you relate to the world and to yourself. Freud developed the concept of narcissism not just as superficial vanity, but as a complex psychic dynamic related to how we invest libidinal energy in ourselves versus others. We all need a certain degree of healthy narcissism to develop self-esteem, to believe we are worthy of love and recognition, to have the courage to pursue our dreams and defend our values. But when this narcissism becomes excessive, or when it wasn't adequately met in the early stages of development, specific patterns of behavior and suffering emerge. If you chose yellow, you likely have an intense and ambivalent relationship with visibility. On one hand, you crave to be seen, recognized, admired, validated. On the other, you might feel ashamed of this need, judge yourself for needing so much external approval, and swing between moments of confident display and periods of embarrassed withdrawal. This dynamic often has roots in early childhood, specifically in what Freud termed the phallic stage of development, where a child is discovering their own power, their ability to affect their environment, their place in the world. If during this phase you received excessive attention that taught you your worth comes from being special and admired, or if you received insufficient attention that left you with a chronic hunger for recognition, the result is a fixation on this need to shine. People who choose yellow are often creative, expressive, charismatic. They have a natural ability to draw attention and energize rooms with their presence. You're probably someone people notice when you walk in, even if you aren't doing anything particularly flashy. There's a light in you that's genuine and valuable. The problem arises when you start confusing this genuine light with the need for constant performance, when you feel you always have to be shining, always impressive, always extraordinary to have a right to exist and be loved. Freud would say your superego is operating with unrealistically high standards, creating an ego ideal that's impossible to consistently achieve. You compare yourself not to real people, but to idealized versions of yourself who can do anything, be anything, conquer anything. And when you inevitably fall short of this impossible ideal, the shame and self-criticism are devastating. Have you noticed how you can swing between moments of inflated confidence, where you feel capable of anything, and moments of brutal self-deprecation, where you feel utterly inadequate and like a failure? These oscillations aren't random emotional instability, but a direct manifestation of the conflict between your real ego and the unattainable ego ideal. The choice of yellow also points to issues related to what Freud called the Oedipus complex, particularly concerning rivalry and competition. You likely have a complex relationship with other talented or successful people. On one hand, you might admire them and want to be around them. On the other, you may feel envy, inadequacy, or a compulsive need to prove you're just as good or even better. This dynamic can make intimate relationships challenging because deep down you're always comparing, always measuring, always competing, even when consciously you just want connection and collaboration. And here's a difficult but liberating truth. You don't need to be extraordinary to be worthy of love. You don't need to shine brighter than everyone else to have a right to take up space in the world. You don't need to constantly impress to deserve care and attention. True love, the kind of love that truly nourishes and sustains, isn't conditional on your performance or achievements. It exists simply because you exist. But accepting this requires you to confront the emptiness that this pursuit of recognition was trying to fill. It requires you to feel the pain of that child who didn't receive the validation they needed, who had to become special and impressive to secure the love that should have been unconditional. It requires you to develop what Freud would call a healthier, more integrated narcissism, where you can recognize your genuine worth without needing constant external validation, where you can celebrate your talents without using them as a defense against feelings of inadequacy. This is deep, transformative work, and it doesn't happen overnight. But it frees up an immense amount of energy that was being wasted on this endless quest to shine. If you chose the deep, earthy green, you're revealing a psychic structure deeply rooted in what Freud would call preservation instincts and the earliest stages of emotional development. Green is the color of nature, of organic growth, of connection to rhythms that are larger and older than individual consciousness. There's a bodily wisdom in you, a connection to basic, fundamental needs that many people have lost in their attempts to become overly civilized or sophisticated. While others live primarily in their heads, you maintain a constant awareness of your body, of physical sensations, of the signals your organism is always sending about what it needs, what's good, what's threatening. This somatic sensitivity is a precious gift, but it can also be a source of great anxiety. Freud observed that many manifestations of psychic suffering express themselves through the body in a process he called hysterical conversion. While this term has problematic connotations today, the phenomenon it described is real. When intense emotions cannot be consciously felt or expressed, they find ways to manifest through physical symptoms, muscle tension, unexplained aches, chronic fatigue, digestive issues. If you chose green, it's highly probable you've experienced this kind of psychosomatic manifestation. Your body literally speaks what your mind cannot or will not articulate. And the more you try to ignore or suppress these signals, the louder they shout, the more persistent they become. The choice of green also suggests a strong connection to the Freudian oral stage of psychosexual development. That initial period of life where the mouth is the primary zone of pleasure and exploration of the world. Not in the literal reductionist sense sometimes attributed to Freud, but in the sense that fundamental issues of nourishment, of receiving, of being cared for, of trusting that your basic needs will be met, are still central to your psychic life. You likely have an intense relationship with food, not necessarily problematic, but loaded with emotional significance. Eating isn't just about nourishing your body for you, it's comfort, it's connection, it's a way of self-soothing, or sometimes of self-punishment. You might use food to regulate difficult emotions, to create a sense of security when the world feels threatening, to fill voids that aren't actually physical. And again, this isn't necessarily pathological unless it's causing significant distress or impairment. It's simply how your psyche learned to cope with emotional needs through concrete bodily experiences. People who choose green often have childhood memories, even if not fully conscious, related to issues of provision, material security, or their caregiver's anxiety about having enough resources to protect and nurture. Perhaps you grew up in an environment where there was real concern about money, food, housing, or maybe your caregivers, even with material resources, lived with constant anxiety about scarcity, passing that insecurity on to you. Either way, you internalized a sense that the world is potentially dangerous, that resources can run out at any moment, that you always need to be prepared, always saving, always protecting yourself. This is a manifestation of what Freud would call a fixation in the early stages of development. And the consequence of this is that you might struggle with generosity, both in giving and receiving. Giving can feel risky, like you're depleting limited resources you might need in the future. Receiving can feel dangerous, like you're creating a debt or dependency that puts you in a vulnerable position. You prefer to be self-reliant, to not need anyone, to be able to take care of yourself. And while self-reliance is a valuable quality, when taken to the extreme, it isolates you, prevents you from experiencing the genuine interdependence that is the foundation of healthy relationships. Green is also associated with jealousy and envy, emotions that Freud explored extensively in his work. Jealousy is the fear of losing something you have. Envy is the painful desire for something another has and you don't. Both of these emotions are likely familiar to you, even if you rarely admit to feeling or expressing them. There is a deep-seated belief within you that resources are scarce, that if someone has more, it means you have less, that the success or happiness of others somehow diminishes your own possibilities. This is a manifestation of what Freud would call thinking, based on the pleasure principle, where reality is interpreted through childhood fantasies of scarcity and competition. The truth is that love, attention, opportunities, joy are not pies where a bigger slice for someone means a smaller slice for you. But stating this intellectually doesn't change the deep emotional experience you carry. Changing that experience requires real therapeutic work, where you can revisit the origins of this feeling of scarcity, where you can feel the pain of that child who genuinely didn't have enough of something essential, be it attention, security, validation, or material resources. It requires you to gradually develop a different sense of security, one that comes not from hoarding and protecting, but from trusting your own ability to handle whatever comes, from knowing you're resilient enough to get through difficulties, from recognizing that genuine connections with others are the most real security there is. Now that you've explored the psychic depths revealed by your color choice, it's important to integrate this understanding into a more complete and compassionate view of yourself. Freud taught us that the goal of psychoanalysis isn't to eliminate conflict or turn you into a completely different person, but rather to bring what is unconscious into consciousness, to expand the territory of the ego at the expense of the id and superego, to allow you to have more choice and agency over how you live your life. Each of the 4 colors reveals not just a different psychic configuration, but also a different set of gifts and challenges. There is no superior or inferior choice, no right or wrong. There is only the invitation to look honestly at who you are, to recognize the patterns that have been governing your life, and to consciously decide what you want to keep and what you want to transform. If you chose red, your path involves learning to honor your intensity without being consumed by it, to integrate your superego in a way that it guides rather than punishes, to express your passion in ways that enrich your life rather than destroy it. If you chose blue, your challenge is to reconnect with the emotional vitality you've learned to manage so well, to allow genuine feelings to move through the sophisticated defenses of your ego, to find balance between thinking and feeling. If you chose yellow, the work is in developing a sense of worth that doesn't depend on external validation, in healing the childhood narcissistic wounds that still drive your quest for admiration, in discovering that you are enough simply by being who you are. And if you chose green, you are being called to confront your most primal anxieties about security and scarcity, to develop trust in life's abundance, to allow others to nurture you as you nurture yourself. All these paths are valid, and all of them are difficult. Deep self-knowledge is not a comfortable process. Freud was honest about that from the start. When you begin to truly look into the dark corners of your psyche, into the impulses you'd rather deny, into the pains you've tried to avoid, into the patterns you've repeated unconsciously, there is inevitable discomfort. There is resistance. There are moments when you'll want to stop, when it will seem easier to return to the familiar unconscious. But on the other side of that resistance is genuine freedom, the ability to live according to who you truly are, rather than being lived by forces you don't understand. So I invite you now to do something concrete with this understanding. Don't let it be just an interesting intellectual exercise that you forget as soon as this video ends. Take a moment today, perhaps before bed, and write about what your color choice revealed. Write about the patterns you recognized, about the wounds that were touched, about the defenses you noticed operating. Also write about what you want to transform, about how you'd like to relate differently to yourself and to others. This simple act of writing is therapeutic in itself. It begins the process of bringing the unconscious into the light of consciousness. And then, if you feel comfortable, share in the comments which color you chose. You don't need to explain why or reveal personal details if you don't want to. But there's something powerful in simply declaring your choice, in publicly acknowledging this aspect of who you are. And perhaps you'll be surprised to discover how many other people made the same choice, how many other people are navigating the same psychic challenges, how many other people understand you more than you imagined. If this content resonated with you, if you felt seen and understood in a way you rarely experience, I invite you to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Not because I need the numbers, but because when you do that, You're saying yes to more self-awareness. You're choosing to continue this path of discovery and transformation. And if you have friends or family who could benefit from this reflection, share this video with them. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone we love is an opportunity to know themselves more deeply. Remember that the choice you made today doesn't define you completely or forever. You are infinitely more complex than any test can capture. But this choice is a window, a gateway to dimensions of your psyche that deserve attention, care, and compassion. The work of psychic integration that Freud described is a lifelong endeavor, not something that happens all at once. But every moment of genuine awareness, every true insight about yourself, every choice to honor who you truly are instead of who you think you should be, all of this moves you toward a more authentic, freer, more fully lived life. And that, in the end, is all that really matters.